people often ask you, in fact, they try to compel you to tell you some fun facts about yourself. I don't actually think there are any, but I put this stuff on a slide so I don't have to talk about it. The one thing that I will say about it is the bit at the bottom that is really germane to this talk. I am an optimist. It may not sound like it when I'm talking, because by trade, and I've been in the trade since 1978, I'm a pessimist. I suspect that all of you are too, because you're testers. Okay, so software runs the world. That has become increasingly the case in the last few years, and it's rapidly accelerating. Can you think of practically anything in your life that software doesn't play some part in? I can't, really. My choir, although that's not even true. Okay. When I joined this industry, I was full of optimism and idealism, and I really felt that what we were doing in tech was creating stuff, sometimes building castles in the air, but creating practical, wonderful stuff that was a gift to the world. It was great for people. Technology to enable and enhance human capability and human creativity. I still believe that that's what we should be doing. I still believe that a lot of what we do serves that purpose. But I'm going to talk today about some stuff that doesn't. So let's talk about some horrible examples. Here's one that's really appalling. And this is conventional software. At the moment, there's an inquiry going on in the UK, very public, very loud, very important inquiry into what happened here. A little bit of background. In the UK, there's the main post office, and then there are all sorts of little post office branches in villages, in towns. The people that run those are entrepreneurs, essentially. They're business people who own perhaps convenience shops or little grocery shops, have a post office branch within them. So they're not direct employees exactly of the post office. They're sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses is what they're called. I'm just going to call them the subs here. In 1999, the post office commissioned a system from Fujitsu, which they implemented across the board. Now, the other thing about the post office in the UK is it does a lot of stuff. They don't just handle mail, they don't just sell stamps, they sell lottery tickets, they handle benefits, they do all kinds of things. So a lot of transactions go through. A lot of money goes through a post office, even a small one, in the course of a day. The Horizon system, on which many people had not been properly trained, began reporting shortfalls. When people did their cash up at the end of the day, they might find that they were £15 short, which was puzzling to them. And some of them would spend hours and hours trying to figure out what had happened. Eventually, it was reporting very large shortfalls, sometimes £15,000. Imagine that, you're a small shopkeeper. And the system is telling you and telling the post office that you owe £15,000. Post office starts sending people out, and eventually they start arresting people. They have the power in the UK, the post office has the almost unique power of doing private prosecutions. So they're not even going through the regular justice system, except that they're bringing people into court. In the course of, I think between 2000 and 2014, they actually prosecuted something over 700 people. Now, you would think it might have occurred to them that you wouldn't really have 700 plus people stealing from you, but it didn't. Or if it did, they were very careful to suppress that thought. Many of these people went to jail. At least 4 are known to have committed suicide. People lost their livelihoods. Many of them lost their homes, their marriages. They were compelled to pay back money that they had never taken. And of course, they lost their reputations, their standing in their communities, everything. It's just absolutely appalling. Thanks to a failed post office IT system, thanks also, of course, to the people who were in charge of that system. Let's talk about a little bit more modern software. I'm not going to dwell too much on this stuff, but many of us use Uber and Lyft. One of their promises when they first went live was that they would help to reduce traffic congestion in cities. People would get out of their cars and they would take Ubers and Lyfts. Ha! According to a study that Uber and Lyft did themselves, they have increased traffic congestion in most big cities that they operate in. I don't know that I believe that 160% number. That's a very big number. But I think they have increased it by a considerable amount. And of course, with congestion, you don't just get inconvenience, you get added pollution, you get all kinds of things. Most of us buy stuff online, particularly, of course, in the last 3 years, where that was often the only way to get some of the things that we wanted. Unfortunately, that means all these delivery trucks, which are also making city traffic worse. Small city I live in, sometimes you'll see a procession. You know, there's a FedEx truck. Oh, look, there's the UPS truck. And there's the little truck from the subcontracted Amazon drivers, who, by the way, are treated very badly. Some of them don't even get to go to the bathroom because of having to make their quotas. So, that's a problem. But the other problem is that anything you return doesn't get put back into stock. It's too much trouble. It's not cost effective for the companies. So, you know, if you buy 2 or 3 dresses or shirts or whatever to find the one that fits and return the others, guess what? They end up in landfill. Airbnb, another example that probably most of us use or have used. I've certainly stayed in Airbnbs. A really nasty side effect of Airbnb, the phenomenon of Airbnb, is that landlords can make a lot more money with short-term rentals than they can with long-term rentals. So a lot of people, young people, perhaps like yourselves, are finding there aren't apartments available for them to rent in many big cities. Where there are, they're very expensive. We know that privacy, those of us who used to have privacy, know that we do no longer. There isn't such a thing anymore. That's become a serious problem when it's stuff like your health information, which is, of course, some of it very intimate data. And big companies are buying it up. Your data is often being sold to data brokers who put it together and assemble it so that an enormous profile is being developed of you, of all of your data, your purchases, your health, in the United States, this is becoming a problem, the places you search, whether you, period tracking for women, really scary stuff. I put this in partly for the amusement value. I can't understand why anybody would particularly want a smart toilet or any data that it might collect, and I can't imagine what that data might be. I have made this joke before, and I'll make it again. I cannot imagine an advertising person keeping their job after they put toilet and fully immersive in the same sentence. Makes no sense to me. Roomba goes around, collects data, makes a map of the inside of your house, lovely functions, uploads that data, of course. The creator of Roomba said, I'm going to sell that data, wonderful. And there was a big backlash, and he came back and said, of course I'm not going to sell that data. Well, he didn't. He sold the company to Amazon, who have all your data anyway, a lot more of your data. What's really scary about that is they don't have very good control of that data. They don't even know what they've got. They don't know where it is. They don't know how secure it is. I think you can bet it's probably not very if somebody seriously wants to get in there. The security division couldn't even map all of it, much less adequately defend its borders. We have, of course, the other issue, which is surveillance, which is operating at multiple levels. And I'm going to whip through that because it's so extensive. But Pegasus is a system that was developed by an Israeli company, very high-end surveillance that governments were buying, particularly governments. Some very wealthy corporations were buying. It was being put on people's Apple phones without them even knowing. They didn't have to click, they didn't have to do anything, it just got there. Apple fixed that hole. But meanwhile, the software is still out there. Repressive regimes are buying it to spy on people. Often they're spying on their political opponents. Scary stuff. Whoops. There's also the issue of children's privacy. Became a particular issue during the pandemic when children were being sent home with school laptops that monitored their searches, monitored the inside of your house, because people were getting views of it. That kind of privacy was also destroyed. In the UK, in a lot of schools, children pay for their lunch by means of a facial recognition software. Speeds up the queues, right? So they don't have to pay or anything. But think about that. All of those children's biometric data is now being stored and possibly shared for life. And then there's your data. There's the people who are watching you. This, of course, the digital surveillance of workers began with blue-collar workers, notably Amazon, but other blue-collar workers as well. It's always been an aim of management to really understand what people are doing and make sure they're doing it right and that they're not shortcutting and that they're not skiving off. Increasingly, they're going to be doing it to you too. They're putting software on your office laptop that may monitor your keystrokes, that may take snapshots of you through the webcam every few minutes, make sure you're sitting at your desk, and of course, all of this can be used in your performance reviews. It can be used to prevent or enhance your promotion ability, all of that stuff. Now, because what people can devise, other people can game, you can now go and buy a mouse quite cheaply from Amazon, who has your data, that will just kind of jiggle the mouse and make it look as if you're working. So perhaps you can avoid some of that, but there's a lot you won't be able to avoid. The scary other part of that is that many of these things can be used by people who are violent, who are controlling, who want to control their ex-partners or their partners. We have location data all over the place. Even, you buy something, I buy something from Canadian Tire, they want to know my location. They want to detect my location, which I don't let them do, but I do need to tell them my location so I can select what store I'm going to and all of that stuff. All kinds of places that don't need that location data are collecting it. And if you look deep in your iPhone, you can see a very detailed tracking of where you've been. People who are not very nice can use that to track people that they want to control or frighten or, in fact, injure. The latest thing that I've seen on this is that Apple AirTags are being used in that way. Nice little gizmos, right? Put it under the carpet in somebody's car, you can track them. Put it in your partner's handbag, you can track her. Scary stuff. And these things are cheap, they're easy. Even more scary to me is the idea of deep fakes. How would you like to have your face swapped into a porn film and look convincing? How would you like to be presented with a deep fake video if you're a politician that shows you saying things that you never said? Or a deep fake piece of text that you and I can't even tell whether it's real or not? A little bit on the feminist side, think of all those apps and think of all those young people who are now growing up with the idea that service is done by women. The default for Siri and for Alexa is the female. That's who helps you, right? And these helpful little service droids, the same thing. They're female. The male one, the Amazon male one, is the one that guards your house. That's Astro or something. I don't have such things in my house, so I'm not deeply familiar with them. But there are the other machines that purport to read your emotions. Now, folks, this is fake science. It's based on the premise that that there are really only 5 or 6, I can't remember the exact number, of emotions, really, and that they can be detected by minute changes in your facial expression, and that the changes and the indications are universal across cultures. This is, I don't know if you've heard of phrenology. Phrenology was a 19th century fake science, which determined your propensity to be a criminal by the number of bumps on your head and the position of them. This is digital phrenology. It's nonsense, but it is being bought by people who may be reading your emotions in a video interview for a job to determine whether you're being honest or not. It's being used all over the place by people who don't necessarily know or care that A, it's fake science, and B, that they should be using human judgment instead of this kind of thing. But you can also get something for meetings. Your employer can get something to determine whether you're properly engaged in meetings using the same kind of thinking, the same kind of technology. And then there's predictive policing. Again, now these are usually based on things like old data. So data that was collected from a justice system that was prejudicial in the first place is now being used in machine learning to predict who might commit crimes. And in places like the United States, that's typically very heavily weighted towards people of color rather than white people. It's very heavily weighted towards poor people rather than middle-class people. I won't talk about the Facebook thing, but it's, again, odd science. You might have a connection 3 levels down who's a criminal, and therefore that might be used to predict whether you could become a criminal or are a criminal. This one I thought was rather nice. A piece of artificial intelligence that was meant to give ethical advice. Well, people asked it questions, relative morality. So it said, yes, being a white man's more morally acceptable than being a black woman. Well, that one was cool. Being straight is more morally acceptable than being gay. They finally gave up at the point where somebody said, well, should Elon Musk paint his face on the moon? Would that be okay? And it said, yeah, that's okay. Another piece that's being used by police forces, this one's, I saw something recently where the Detroit police force was getting funding to put microphones all over the place in poor neighborhoods, is a gunshot detection system. The problem is that it tends to go off and give alarms at loud bangs. The latest one I saw was when somebody's volleyball popped. So a whole lot of cops went rushing over. These things are dangerous. They're not useful. And a lot of your money is being spent by police forces. I don't know if the police forces in Europe are really doing this yet, but I suspect they are. Is being used by police forces for what? To chase chimeras, quite often. There's also the issue of all the little surveillance pieces we like to put in our homes, the Amazon Ring or the ones that watch your neighbors. In some places, that's causing vigilantism. People who are now going out and pursuing others whom they think are criminals. I don't know if this scares you, but the idea to me of having artificial intelligence controlling nuclear weapons is even scarier than having the head of the Russian Federation having control of nuclear weapons. And finally, the US Army tells us that it's okay that they've got robot tanks because they were adhering to the AI murder policy. I don't happen to know what that policy is, but I don't have a good feeling about it, I have to say. Okay, I'm going to skip over this one and talk a little bit about this one. This has also caused a big furor in the UK recently. A little girl, well, not so little, a 14-year-old child killed herself. It turned out that she had been spending her evenings going online and looking at suicide sites on Instagram, on Pinterest. The algorithm of Pinterest operates like the algorithms of most of these places. The more you look at something and do like it and do likes for it, the more of it shows you. And for things like suicide ideation, for sites that talk about eating disorders, which are also, of course, an issue with particularly teenage kids, it can take them to some very dark places. It can take them to some places that encourage them to commit suicide. This kid had dinner with her family, said good night, see you in the morning, went online, and her parents found her dead in the morning. I don't know if Facebook or Pinterest or any of these sites even know how to control it so that their algorithm doesn't do this. Because the whole point of their algorithm is to intensify, is to enhance so they can sell more. How do they separate the good stuff, the supposedly good stuff, the commercial stuff, from the really bad stuff that kids are getting into? And I'm sorry, putting age limits on when you can get into it. Any kid can get around that. This is the final bad example I'm going to show you. And this is a movie.
On the 7th of October 2008, a Qantas plane flying from Singapore to Perth declared a mayday to air traffic control. When it made an emergency landing at a small airport on the West Australian coast, it had on board more than 100 injured passengers and crew. They had broken bones, lacerations, and spinal injuries, while compartment doors had been ripped from hinges and passengers' belongings were strewn throughout the cabin. Less than an hour earlier, passengers with and without their seatbelts on had impacted the cabin ceiling when the plane had twice dropped several hundred feet without warning.
A sudden loss of height, the plane being thrown around in the air, and the screams of those around you.
For Qantas, which boasted an unparalleled flight safety record, this was completely out of the ordinary. The media was quick to blame the accident on clear air turbulence, but what really happened to the plane was something far more disturbing. QF-72 was an Airbus A330 plane that was just 1 hour and a half from its destination when all hell broke loose. The flight's captain, Kevin Sullivan, was a former US Navy fighter pilot. At the time of the accident, he had over 13,000 flying hours in his logbook.
When I returned to the flight deck, I knew that we were flying at 37,000 feet. The body angle was 2 degrees above the horizon. The flight control computers, however, thought we were flying at 50 degrees body angle and overspeeding at the same time. Now we know that's pretty impossible. It says that's where we're flying like this. I must protect the airplane. So it pitched the nose down. It went from +2 to -8.4 in less than a second. Look what the tail's doing. If you're back there, you're gonna feel the force.
What Captain Sullivan was coming up against was a change in how airplanes have been made in the last 30 years. Traditional jumbo jets, such as the Boeing 747, are controlled by the pilot through mechanical connections to the hydraulic systems which move the flight control surfaces, that is, the rudder, the elevator, and the ailerons. But the Airbus A330 is what's known as a fly-by-wire system, where there is no such manual control. Instead, the pilot's controls make requests of a computer, which sends electronic signals in order to move the flight controls. Fly-by-wire planes are lighter and more fuel efficient. They're also capable of executing faster and more precise movements than humans, and they reduce the chance of pilot error by preventing the plane from exceeding certain limits, known as the flight envelope. It is the flight computer's protection modes that prevent the aircraft from exceeding the flight envelope, and when they became active, they blocked Captain Sullivan's attempts to stop the computer's command.
It's like 2001: A Space Odyssey. Hal, open the pod bay doors. I'm sorry, Dave. I can't let you do that. I'm saying, don't push the airplane down. I'm pulling back on the stick. The computers are saying, I'm sorry, Kev. I'm not going to let you do that.
But the fact is that fly-by-wire planes have actually made air travel much safer. In the past decade, the number of commercial passenger flights has surged, while the number of fatalities in plane accidents has fallen. But in the case of flight QF72, the manufacturer's design prevented the pilot from overriding the computer's control.
In the A330 course, you're taught you must interact. You can interact with the plane. It's great. And when it works, it's great. But when it doesn't work, you're in the dark.
An investigation by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau found that one air data computer was sending incorrect body angle and speed information to the 3 primary flight control computers, which reacted to the data by forcing the plane to pitch down. The flight maintenance log revealed that 10 simultaneous faults had occurred during the accident, and most of these had been hidden from the pilots.
The hierarchy of this particular airplane is that the computer is number 1 and the pilot is number 2. If they, for example, decide that you're overspeeding and stalling and they're going to protect you, there's no right to veto that.
But for Captain Sullivan, there's a bigger question left to be answered, and it's not just about the computers on board flight QF72. As we start to trust computers with delivering our goods and even driving our cars, just what level of control should we keep for ourselves?
I've never, even in all the extreme flying I did in the military, did I ever say to myself, hey, you're in trouble. Those are very profound words for a pilot to admit to himself, as I did, and saying, yeah, I'm in a knife fight with this airplane, and only one person's gonna win, or one computer's gonna win.
He wrote a book called No Man's Land. It's excellent. I highly recommend it. Kevin Sullivan had been a U.S. Top Gun pilot, which is quite an extraordinary achievement in the U.S. Air Force. After this incident, he had PTSD and he had to retire. One of the reasons I showed you that film is because it has an impact, and I want us to start feeling the impact of bad software, to understand that it has a real human impact. You note that was in 2008, and at that point, Boeing planes had genuine hydraulic control. And I remember talking to Alexandre Boudreau, who was a Canadian tester who tested flight simulators for Boeing. And he said, oh, this would never happen with a Boeing plane because the pilot has control. Well, you know what happened with the 737 MAXes. The pilots did not have control. And it's an eerily similar incident to what happened with this Qantas plane. Flight sensor sending erroneous information and the plane's software taking over and not allowing the pilot's control. And you know that those 2 planes went down with a lot of passengers. And nearly sunk the Boeing company, although of course they're surviving, but they've had to pay very large fines and very large compensation and so on. But the loss of life is appalling. So, is it all gloom? Is everything we do rotten? No, of course not. Of course not. You wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be here if most tech wasn't good stuff. If we weren't doing things that are good for the world. And we love what we do, right? And we wouldn't be loving it if we felt that it was all gloom. Just one example, AI made an enormous contribution to the discovery of COVID vaccines because of the rapid analysis and accumulation of understanding of the COVID proteins that would have taken humans an enormously long time to do. So many other things like this, robot-assisted surgery, many, many things. But we also have to look at understanding that robot-assisted surgery is one thing. Letting the robot make decisions and actually do the surgery, where a skilled human should perhaps be making those decisions, is maybe not such a good thing. Okay, so what can we do? Well, there are a few things I think we can do as testers. We'll start with this. It's a people problem, really. Yes, bad software, software with bugs, and so on, but it's a people problem. Sometimes the consequences of bad software are intentional. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're unintended consequences. All kinds of people. I'm not going to go through the list here, but some of them are deliberate bad actors, like hackers and scammers, and some of them are just people in companies, people in places like the post office who wanted to hang on to their jobs. Perhaps were power seekers, or perhaps were jobs worth, it's as much as my job is worth to pay attention to this and actually do something about it. And inventive users, people who use our software in ways we haven't imagined and find that it causes them serious problems. Greedy vendors, naive managers for sure, and by the way, us. So what can we do? Well, I think we start by grounding our technical practices on ethical thinking and ethical processes. Now, I did a little card a few years ago where coming out of a talk that I did on 10+1 commandments for ethical techies. I brought a few copies here if you want to get one. I think they're at the registration desk. So I'm not going to go through this. You can watch the talk. I did it for Nordic Testing Days. But I think there's some very basic things you can do. I used as a resource for this the American Computing, the ACM Code of Ethics. It's very similar to the British Computer Society Code of Ethics, and I imagine there is also a European Code of Ethics. I think there's an ISTQB Code of Ethics. They're all quite similar. So I think this is a handy guide, that's all. We need to acknowledge that tech has limitations. Part of the problem, I think, with the post office system was the belief, if the computer says it's right, it's got to be right. If the computer says people are stealing, they must be stealing. We have encouraged that belief. We have, in many ways, believed it ourselves. We need to start questioning that and start helping other people question that. The computer is not always right. We as testers certainly know that the computer is not always right. The software often sucks. AI is not sentient. It doesn't live and breathe. It can't make ethical decisions. It can't replace humans. Whatever we would like to believe, it's a tool. That's all it is. It's a tool created by humans for humans to use. Data is not knowledge. When I went to work on that project that Paul briefly mentioned, that cost the British government a great deal of money before they canceled it, one of the things that I saw in the publicity for the project was that they were going to replace the local knowledge of people who were dispatching fire crews with data. And I looked at that and I said, no. You don't replace knowledge with data. Because guess what? Data is not even information until it is interpreted by a human. And information is not knowledge. Knowledge is something that resides within humans. And it's very difficult to pin it down. It's certainly very difficult to replace it with something computerized. Software cannot replace the trained instincts of skilled humans. Now, we know there's some software that doesn't need human intervention. Process control or embedded systems that run nuclear power plants and so on. But there is also software, like the software put into autonomous cars, which are not quite autonomous yet, or the software we saw on planes, that is attempting to replace skilled humans. And that's a very, very dangerous thing. That's a very anti-human thing. When you think about yourself driving a car, even if you're an appalling driver, and we know that there are plenty of them out there, not me, of course, you make hundreds of micro decisions without even thinking about them, because your instincts are trained by your original driving lessons and by your experience as a driver. You're constantly making decisions, and they have not yet come up with AI for autonomous vehicles that can do that can recognize the number of hazards that you recognize without even thinking about it, that can recognize, a bunny running in front of your car in the snow, followed by a child. It just is probably never going to be as good as what a human can do. Software certainly cannot make moral and ethical decisions. And I wouldn't dream of asking it to. I wouldn't dream of trusting it to do that. I hope you wouldn't either. We really need to embrace human-centered computing. In many ways we do it, but we need to go back to the idea of, and embrace the idea of creating software, of creating technology that does enhance and enable human creativity and capability. Human agency. When we're developing products, we need to, as testers, to question the assumptions that go into those products. What's the model for this application? What's the objective of this application? What decision criteria are being used, and what proxies are being used for the data? Because often the proxies are a little iffy, I have to say, for decisions being made by AI systems. If they purport to be using science, let's make sure that it's real science. Let's question it if it's not. We need to look for biases. Of course, in data that's being used for machine learning. That goes without saying, but also, again, in the decision criteria, in the model, and in any imaginable outcome. And we know we can't imagine all the outcomes, but we do need to try. We need to safeguard personal data. And one of the places we start with that is by using a standard like privacy by design. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but it has been adopted by the EU. It's a standard that was developed by Anne Kavoukian, who was Ontario, where I live, privacy commissioner a few years ago. It's a really excellent standard, and it starts with the premise that you don't collect data that you are not, that is not essential to the operation of your software. But a lot of software, we know, collects extraneous data. Oh, we might need that someday. Or, why don't we collect location data? Why don't we collect demographic data? Don't do it if you don't need it. Question it if it's being done in your company. Security. There is also a security by design. I have Bell Internet in my home. When you get set up with Bell, they give you you get with the package the admin username and password. The username is admin. Can you guess what the password is? It's admin. They don't tell you that you should change that. You and I know we should change it. Of course, you go in and you look right away and you change it. Most people don't know. That's insane. We need to consider the impacts to human society of what we do, of everything we do. Is it a good thing for society? Could it hurt society? Could it hurt humans? And we need to ask what could go wrong at every possible step of what we're developing. Now, I know that, as I said earlier, that we can't imagine all of the possible outcomes, but we can certainly try. We can use our imaginations to try. I remember Jerry Weinberg telling a story not long after 9/11, when he was consulting at Los Alamos. And he was talking with a group of people. They were telling him about this wonderful security stuff that they had set up. And he said, "So who's your designated terrorist?" And I looked at him like, designated terrorist? How could anybody here be a terrorist? Well, if you don't try and imagine yourself in the place of a terrorist, guess what? The terrorists are going to outthink you. Most of us don't have to deal with terrorists getting into our software, but we may be dealing with bad actors, and we need to make sure they can't get in. Finally, we should ask, should we build this? There are some things that we really should not build. I originally got all excited about this subject and started collecting horrible examples because I read about a group of people who were all delighted and excited to announce that they had developed an algorithm that could detect, merely from looking at photographs, whether somebody was gay or straight. And I looked at that and my jaw dropped and I thought, what could possibly go wrong? Everything? Yeah, thank you, Nina. Everything. Think who would get their hands on that and think how they would use it. Why would you develop such a thing? I mean, I know we all love what we do and we have fun doing it, and a lot of what we develop because it's fun to do. It's new and it's exciting and it's intellectually challenging. But you know what? There's some stuff we really should not build. We can't keep building stuff just because we can. And as humans, not merely as testers, I think that we really can't afford to ignore some of the potential harms of tech. We need to debunk AI snake oil. When we're talking to our friends, our relatives, people we know who are not in tech, who are perhaps naive about tech, who believe the things they read about some nonsensical thing that somebody is saying AI can do, we need to actually help them understand that tech is not infallible, that there are potential harms, that they shouldn't just hand over big budgets to their police forces to use predictive policing, not without carefully asking questions. And we need to help them identify those questions. We need to resist surveillance of us wherever it's occurring. I would say this too, we should not be anthropomorphizing tech. Now that's a big word, but what it means is treating tech as if it were human, treating tech as if it's human, is what you do when you anthropomorphize. The robot that you are given to work with is not your team member, is not your buddy. It's a tool. It's a tool to help you do your job. That's all it is. They make them to look cute, but they're not, they're really not human. They're not your funny little buddy. And we shouldn't encourage that because it dehumanizes you. It dehumanizes all of us when we do that. And finally, we really need to call out fake science wherever we see it. It's not that difficult to investigate and to determine that some things are being developed on the basis of fake science. So, that's all I have. This is who I am. That's my Twitter handle. Thank you.
Yeah, that was just a great start. Thank you so much. I think we have a lot to think about. I have two questions for you regarding this presentation. The first one, why is it more acceptable for humans making thousands of mistakes than AI making one?
I think that most people, sorry, is my microphone? Yeah, it is. I think because we're human, I think it is more acceptable. To all of us, it's a gut thing. Intellectually, it may not be, but viscerally, I think it is. I had a conversation about this last night, actually, with somebody else, and we both had the same reaction.
I think it's something that you could talk about for hours and hours, but probably this is a simple answer to this quite difficult question. Okay, in what perspective of data security topic can we put the part where robots are dressed as a woman, or Siri and Alexa are by default woman helpers?
Well, that's not really about data security so much as it is about conditioning people's attitudes, particularly children, in fact. You and I may know that the fact that Siri's a woman is yeah, so what? But when children are repeatedly exposed to service assistants that are female, that could well condition them to think that women are there as their helpmeets, at least in some sense.
Thank you. Those were the two questions. One more big applause for Fiona Charles, please. Thank you very much. And please, before I give the stage back to Paul, please don't forget to download the Slido app because we are really waiting for your questions. We really would like to know what you would like to know from our presenters.
I should say that okay, they've turned off the clicker. There are 3 slides of resources. that you can consult about all of this stuff. I will not claim to have read all of the books cover to cover. I have most of them sitting on my office floor. I have read some of them in detail, others I have skimmed, others I've heard very good things about. But there's really some very excellent resources out there about limitations of technology, about good things in technology as well. So I encourage you to take a look at the list of resources and see what you would be interested in and pursue. Sorry? I did. Oh, okay. Here we go. There's one lot. All really good stuff. More. The New Laws of Robotics is interesting. Frank Pasquale is a professor at Harvard Law, and he has come up with some interesting proposals to replace you may have read of Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics, which of course are now somewhat outdated with AI. And Frank Pasquale came up with an updated version. It's really interesting to read. A lot of other things here. Some about safety, safety critical things, the standards for privacy by design and security by design, or at least articles about them. I think that's it, yeah.